Hello, hello, and welcome to Hot Take Think Tank. I'm Kier.
And I'm Liam. Since it's our first episode, I thought we'd start with just a brief introduction of ourselves and the podcast.
Yeah, like many other podcasts, the idea spawned from us really enjoying our conversations.
Yeah, we found we were interested in a lot of the same things, but we brought very different perspectives.
Yeah, for a long time, I was an extreme social justice culture warrior with a pretty interesting view of the world.
Yeah, totally. Whereas I was pretty put off by all of the culture war stuff, and so I sort of just disconnected from politics for a while.
Yeah, but we noticed when we get into a good discussion, it was often about something a little bit less shiny than the culture wars. And when that happened, our different perspectives overlapped and contrasted in ways that sort of fascinated both of us.
Totally. And that's the idea for the show. Sometimes we'll talk about the culture wars at like a meta level, but mostly I think we want to talk about things that feel important to us in politics and culture and technology.
Yeah, let's get into it. Liam, what have we got in store for today?
All right, we've got an article about building a public alternative to Facebook, an article to discuss about Bidenomics, and of course, we're going to talk about the triumphant return of Kier here with an article about romanticizing illness. But first,
Wow, way to toot my horn. Carry on.
Kier, I think you wanted to start our episode with some good news.
Yeah, I figure everyone could use a little more good news in their life. So, yeah, let's start off with that.
Totally.
Labor Day has just passed, so I wanted to highlight some really amazing news coming out of the U.S. National Labor Relations Board, which is going to make running a successful union campaign a lot easier. So the announcement on August 25th was that if during the run-up to an election, a union election, the employer commits an unfair labor practice, the union is automatically recognized and the employer must bargain with it. So basically in the States, there's a two-step process to unionization. First, a majority of workers at a company have to sign union cards. Then the employer can request an election, which they almost always do.
Mm-hmm.
And in that in-between time, once everyone's or many people have signed the union cards, but before the election, that's when companies will wreak havoc and they will do everything in their power to scare workers away from voting yes on the union.
Mm-hmm. And some things, I guess, that are not legally in their power, but things they will do anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the thing. There was very little recourse if they broke the law while they were, trying to evade the union. So, they might fire the person who started the union drive, and 4 years later, as it winds through the courts, that person gets their job back. But they could still completely sabotage a union drive in that method.
Right.
They can't do that anymore. If they use any illegal tactics, oh, look, you have a union. So that's a huge win.
Totally. I feel like that makes total sense to me. And it's kind of wild that it wasn't that way before because, I don't know, just like my brain goes to an analogy like a running race or something. And if someone is caught cheating in the race, you don't restart the whole race and run it again.
Right.
Right. It's just like that person is declared the loser of the race. And right. It's this seems like a great step forward.
Absolutely. And just to tantalize people out there, we have an even better thing that happened here in British Columbia, Canada. Yeah. Last year, the provincial NDP government reintroduced single-step certification. So that means you just have to get at least 55% of people to sign a union card.
Oh, okay. There's not like a
election.
A second level, right? Sign the union cards and then also hold an election. It's just a one step.
Exactly. Huh. And this actually was the norm until the 1980s when a wave of anti-labor policies were introduced. So we're actually going back to what we used to have.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. That sounds like good news for those Americans.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, there's been, a huge increase with union representation petitions that are
Mm.
going to the National Labor Relations Board.
Mm-hmm.
The number of groups applying for union certification in BC has doubled since this
Wow.
legislation last year.
Yeah.
So before we move on, I just want to run down some great union drives that we've seen.
Sure.
So in 2023, this year,
Mm-hmm.
we saw workers unionize at the Star Garden Topless Dive Bar in LA, Barnes & Noble, Bandcamp,
Mm-hmm.
Apple retail
Mm-hmm.
stores. If we go back for the last couple of years, you can add Cineplex, Sephora, PetSmart, Condé Nast, Indigo. There have been museum workers, cannabis workers, liquor store workers, farm workers unionizing. And this is
Wow.
without even mentioning Amazon and Starbucks, which have huge campaigns in
Yeah.
both the US and Canada.
Totally.
So yeah, it's been great. UPS workers won big in their
Yeah.
contract. American Airlines pilots did. It's not all good news. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
we've still got people striking with the Actors Guild or the Actors Union,
Yep.
the Writers Guild. Los Angeles hotel workers are on strike,
Mm.
but we got a lot going in our favor. Public support remains strong.
Mm-hmm.
And Liam,
Mm-hmm.
if you had to guess,
Mm-hmm.
who is the most pro-union generation alive?
Ooh. Gen Z?
It is Gen
Cool.
Z.
Yeah.
64% of Gen Z support union drives. So
Sweet.
that's my good news to start us off.
That is good news. All right. Should we jump into our first article to discuss here?
Yeah, let's do it.
Great. All right. It's an article entitled A Meta Alternative Could Serve the Public Instead of Private Interests, written by Drew Oya J. It's an article, I think, that was prompted by Bill C-18 here in Canada, which is a new law in Canada that was meant to result in the tech giants paying for Canadian journalism. But instead it resulted in the tech giants no longer displaying news in Canada, mostly. And the article gets at a few common critiques of big tech in general, and Facebook specifically, like that Meta and Google have very dominant positions in the advertising market, privacy, not their top concern. Facebook as a platform has obviously enabled some very bad ideas to spread. It's kind of messed up the whole business model of journalism. There used to be a lot more money in it before the internet came along. And just generally that they're companies that are motivated to improve their bottom line as opposed to like improve the world or the public interest. And then the article goes into pitching an alternative, which is a publicly owned and publicly funded alternative to Facebook, with servers possibly run by Canada Post. Kier, what did you think while reading this article?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mostly thought, what will Liam think? I was really happy to see someone kind of have bold ideas like this, because I do think that it's really worth considering, like, what should our online public forums look like, particularly because they've become so crucial, right? Like,
Yeah.
this Bill C-18, and this article, Drew Oya J's article, was on The Breach, which is a Canadian media project, which is really worth checking out. But when I go to look at Breach content on Instagram, it's not there anymore. There's a notice that says people in Canada can't see this content. So, yeah, people were concerned about this, particularly around all the wildfires that we're having and the evacuations. And, that a lot of people would go to Facebook to look at community groups that would be reposting news that is now unavailable. So I do think that, like, being at the whims of these large international non-Canadian companies is less than ideal. But Liam, what did you think?
Well, what I liked about the article was that I did feel like it brought up a lot of like very genuine concerns that make a lot of sense about sort of the state of things as they are. And sort of where I found the article overall very endearing. I love the idea of Canada Post running servers, but I did think it sort of didn't totally understand sort of how things got to how they are now, and sort of what would be required of like an actual like seismic shift that would lead to enduring change around all of this sort of thing. I mean, at one point they mentioned that there's been like a slew of competitors to Facebook that have come up over the years, and that mostly they have, risen and then fallen away. And I don't feel like the article grapples much with the idea of like how, other than being funded by the government and maybe promoted or marketed by the government, how like an alternative could be built that people would like choose to use instead of Facebook as it is.
Right.
Well,
Yeah, absolutely. One of my concerns too is that content moderation is, one of the most controversial topics around these social media sites, right? And I think, you need moderation, right? Like
totally.
even if you love free speech, I love free speech, but there's people that they're bad actors that will post stuff that nobody wants to see, right?
Totally.
So,
or just straight up illegal things. There are some things that even with free speech, you can't say, there are things you can't do or say or post.
Yeah, exactly. And there's just so much that ends up in the gray area, right? Borderline content. And, I think we've watched over the last many years that there's no pleasing everybody, and how politicized the question becomes of how to best handle these content moderation decisions. So as interested as I am in a public social media option, I think that's a fascinating idea. I can't help but wonder if possibly it could turn up the heat on the culture wars where
right. It would actually be the government taking down your Facebook post.
Exactly. Right.
That wouldn't just be a conspiracy theory. It's true. Having a profit driven company in the middle. It is a different dynamic for sure than the actual state taking down your words.
Yeah. And how much would that factor into elections? Would the site change drastically if the prime minister changed? And I know, we have examples like the CBC where things are more complicated than that. They have journalistic independence, right? They're not a propaganda arm of the state. So it's not black and white in that sense. But I guess it's an interesting proposition because it is pretty unimaginable given that we've been relying on these private companies to provide this service, right? And kind of what are the challenges that would arise from such a dramatically different approach?
Totally. Yeah. But I hadn't thought of it from that angle, honestly. But I keep coming back to the perspective of people, the citizens of Canada do largely choose to use Facebook. So there must be something of value that they're getting there. And I don't think it would be, I don't know. If I try and picture how this would actually play out, I feel like the government would launch an app and people might try it once and then they'd abandon it. Because it's not easy to build a social media website. It's not, there are some calculations of that it might cost $30 million a year to pay, a team of engineers and designers and that sort of thing to make a competitive alternative. It was funny. They did mention that they didn't think private investment could pony up that much. So I looked up some examples of Snapchat has raised about $5 billion.
Wow.
Twitter raised $12 billion. Telegram raised $3 billion. Because it's a tremendous business opportunity. Anyone who could successfully unseat Meta from their position in the market would stand to make a lot of money. So there actually has been a tremendous amount of money and resources thrown after the goal of unseating Meta, not for necessarily the pro-social goals that are laid out in this article, but people have people have done their darndest to take market share, and it's tough.
That is really interesting, yeah, because it would have to be opt-in, and it, like, Facebook is an incredible company in terms of its resources, its attention to detail, like what it can afford to do, and the constant innovation and everything. So yeah, it would be quite something for any and any public public organization to kind of take that on. But I really did appreciate this article, and Drew Oyajay has written a number of articles around Bill C-18, the Online News Act. And yeah, it's a really big deal. So I'm glad to see that he's on that beat.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. And I love a totally out there idea. Even if I don't think it's one that would like work out necessarily, I just like how weird ideas feel in the brain, makes you think of problems from angles you might not have thought of them otherwise.
Absolutely. I totally agree. This article really got my imagination going, which is very enjoyable. Yeah,
totally. Sure. There was one line at the end, though, that made me, I was like, oh no, this sounds like a terrible website. Where it says, Meta's vision of keeping us tuned out with celebrities and memes is great for their ad revenues and terrible for the planet. And it just makes me think of, like, imagine a social network without any memes on
it. Right. Like, what do people put on the official calendar?
Yeah, like only like talking about volunteer work they've done or something like that. People love their memes.
I feel like that would be very like Canada coded if it was just like this sort of network of like neighborhood groups that were like
they just say please and thank you a lot.
Polite, but also kind of passive aggressive and like arguing over like things that really don't matter at all. And then once in a while, like a conspiracy theorist pops in, and that would.
It's fun. It's funny. I remember hearing that back in like the good old days where journalism made a lot of money, right? They'd be selling newspapers every day, and lots of people would buy them. That the most popular sections of the newspaper were always sports and lifestyle. Those were like the sections of the newspaper that like the customers were actually paying for, was like the fun stuff. And that like the hard-hitting journalism that is like the valuable part that we're worried about losing as a society was always sort of like a bonus that like they sold so many copies thanks to the lifestyle section that they could afford the staff to do the hard-hitting journalism.
That is kind of depressing to me, but also people love celebrities.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Totally. I mean, and it's and I feel like it's similar today, right? With the meme and celebrity Facebook business. Like the problem is that they got like separated. Right now, it's a different company that does the hard-hitting journalism from the company that does the celebrities and the memes. So it's like there's no longer like that simple funnel of like it's all under one umbrella organization. We sell all the ads. We get to choose where the money goes, right? It's now the hard-hitting journalism like actually has to compete in the marketplace for their slice of the pie, which is worrying.
Wow, yeah. It is worrying, yeah. I mean, journalism has been in trouble for a long time, and like basically Google and Meta have almost monopolized like ad revenue, which is really, contributed to the closure of a lot of newspapers. So there's certainly, there needs to be a solution, but I don't think it's Bill C-18.
No, I feel like it's got to, like, it needs to be a solution that, like, accounts for, like, the changes wrought by the internet and, like, builds a business model that makes sense given the new, like, landscape of information. And it's going to probably be pretty different from how journalism operated before, and it's hard to see an industry like have to go through such a radical shift and such an important one. But the idea of like how can we get it back to how it was before, I think it's too late. Genie's out of the bottle. The internet exists.
Yeah, it's not going back in.
Yes, totally. Even if the government built all of the websites we used.
Yes, yeah, it's true. Right on. Well, anything else to say on that article?
I guess my only other thought about it was, I did just a thing I've heard about social networks and generally what makes them so hard to build is that the biggest value any social network can have is its users. In that, like, everyone just wants to use a social network where the people they want to follow are posting there, or their friends are there, or their family is there. And so that, I don't know, made me think for like a nationally built social network. I'm not sure how that would work for anyone who wanted to talk across the borders. Like, would the goal be for Canada to run the new big global social network, or would it be like citizens only?
That's a really good question.
It would be tricky. It would be very hard, I think, for the Canada's government to to become a global player in the social media game. And then it would also have to start moderating things about like disinformation in other countries.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be. I hope some country tries this so we can see what happens. For sure.
Yeah, okay. It did make me wonder sort of what I would come up with if I had to come up with a way to regulate social media in a way that like encourages competition and like maybe helps a Facebook competitor come to the fore, maybe someone a company whose values I like better. And I remember hearing that I think in a lot of the European Union, all the banking apps have to conform to the same standard. So they have to basically, you can integrate, any programmer can write code that integrates with every bank in all of Europe, sort of thing. And so there's like this big industry of providing different interfaces to different banks, and it makes it way easier to move your money from one bank to another, or without switching apps, that sort of thing. And
Wow.
I just picture legislation about social media that's similar, where it's like, if you want to run a social media company, you have to, put people's posts out in this format and people's, follower lists in this format and that and this, just so that other new companies can be built that sort of leverage Facebook's existing like social graph and post network and all of that sort of thing, and sort of build on top of
Yeah.
it instead of needing to build all of that from scratch.
Absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense because then you're not held hostage by a particular program or app because you're like, oh no, like I can't move. Like I don't own my list or I
Totally.
don't, there's no way to do that, And I do think new companies such as Substack, which I am on, have a different model than that. And they're,
Totally.
really like they have to work to keep writers there because you own your list and your posts,
Yes.
and you can leave if you want to, which
Totally.
feels really good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it almost makes you think way back to like when I had started using the internet, and there used to be like the apps where it would like be all of the different chat services built into a single app. So you could do like your AIM messages and your all your various like acronyms. I don't remember. MSN Messenger. They were all like
Right.
integrated into a single desktop app, and you could use them all. And like the other person on the other end could just be using the Skype app, or maybe they're using one of these like protocol conforming apps too. And yeah, that would be cool. I'm not sure
That would be
if
really
yeah.
cool.
I don't know if Canada sort of would have this way, if Facebook might just leave Canada before it implemented all that stuff. But who knows?
That's what's interesting. Yeah, is like how far could you push them? Because I guess Drew Jay mentions in another article about the France French have implemented a 3% tax on these big tech corporations and are going to pull in like $1 billion this year as a result.
Not bad.
And that, yeah, maybe instead of this like nitpicking like the news aspect of it, right? If it were just like this is what it costs to operate in this country.
Mm-hmm.
That, that might work better. And yeah, Facebook would, I think, have a really hard time deciding to completely leave the country over a modest tax proposal like that.
Totally. Yeah, and then you can use the funds from that to try to counteract whatever badness might be going on, thanks to them operating there.
Exactly. I think next we were going to talk about Bidenomics and
Yes.
the Democratic attempt to spin the term Bidenomics into
Yeah.
a good thing.
Yeah, sure. I got a little article summary here. It's an article from the New York Times entitled "Biden Struggles to Make Bidenomics a Plus, Not a Minus," by Reid J. Epstein, who covers President Biden's re-election campaign. It's an article about sort of the apparent mismatch between the measures of economic success and the polling numbers about how people feel Biden is handling the economy. The measures seem generally positive. Inflation has come down, GDP is growing, unemployment is very low. But despite that, some polls have shown like 70% disapproval of Biden's economic record.
Wow.
Yeah. And Kier, I think you did a little research into sort of the bills that he's passed to do with the economy and that.
Yeah, I did. So one bill that's mentioned in this article is the Inflation Reduction Act, which was signed into law just over a year ago, August 16th of 2022. And this one's interesting because, first of all, Biden regrets the name.
Right, because it doesn't have to do with reducing inflation, I don't think, does it?
It does not. And although inflation has come down, most economists agree that the bill had somewhere between little and nothing to do with that. But it's about providing alternatives to generate economic growth. And it does some really cool stuff. So yeah, I just wanted to draw attention to kind of the details of it because it is mostly about the environment and healthcare. Yeah, so bad name choice. But
Yes.
yeah, so the law is the largest investment into addressing climate change in the history of the United States.
Great.
It also is lowering prescription drug prices for some people. It invests in domestic energy production and promotes clean energy. So there's a bunch of cool stuff like Medicare getting expanded to include free vaccines. It's capping insulin prices.
Right.
There's a ceiling for prescription drug prices. As a Canadian, it is very sad that you only get Medicare basically if you're a senior citizen or possibly if you're disabled. So I think it's only about 20% of the U.S. population that will experience these benefits, but it's something, right? Yeah, and so there's like different subsidies for like retrofitting your home to be more efficient. There's a new 15% minimum corporate tax for billion-dollar companies. There's a 1% fee on stock buybacks. So yeah, there's a lot of really stuff in there that like will affect people's lives. And even like the bill that I heard that the Biden government passed that like there was no fanfare around it. They didn't promote it or advertise it, but it was a really big deal was the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act.
Right, totally.
Which was also called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And yeah, it was huge. It was like the largest investment in public transit in the history of the country, the largest investment in passenger rail in the last 50 years. It's expanding high-speed internet that's affordable. It's, it's got clean water infrastructure. Yeah, there's a lot in there that I feel like progressives have been wanting and waiting for, and I'm sure there are also people who don't feel that it goes far enough. But yeah, I think there are kind of all these little pieces that will hopefully slowly but surely, make Americans feel more secure.
Yeah, yeah, totally. It's I do think it's a bit interesting because generally, like the textbook understanding for reducing inflation, you want there to be sort of less economic activity. So the idea that like his two big
Interesting.
bills are both like huge spending bills is kind of funny. Like I feel like people were worried when those were passed that it was going to make inflation much worse instead of making it better.
Well, the Inflation Reduction Act also raised a lot of money, right, by
Yeah,
introducing
totally.
like the corporate tax rate and stuff. So it was trying. It wasn't like 100% that the bill was going to pay for itself, but it was like approaching that, which was cool.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
yes, the infrastructure bill was like a $1 trillion investment, if I have my numbers right. So yeah, it was a chunk of money for sure.
yeah, totally. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting. I did. I think it's. I don't know. What did you think of the headline of this article?
What was it again?
Just Biden struggles to make Bidenomics a plus, not a minus. Well, and I just ask because it's funny. I don't know. Part of me wonders like how much headlines like that are part of the explanation for the situation, where like the
Right.
headline isn't about the economy being good. It's about like the horse race of politics, kind of.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, and one thing that stood out to me too about the article
Mm.
was that I believe it said that polling seemed to show that how we feel about the economy has a lot to do with whether we are a Democrat or a Republican.
Right.
Uh, that's like a significant factor. Um, so yeah, it is interesting to like because the good news buried in the article is like that the economy is doing really well and that like
Yeah.
you know
Well,
all
and all
all
those
these
things you
metrics
just
show that.
listed. Yeah, yeah. Both the metrics are showing it, and also I feel like there are plenty of people who would take a small hit to the economic performance in exchange for all those things you just listed are in the bill. You know what I mean?
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly. But it kind of got me thinking
Mm.
because like I looked up the median household income in Vancouver,
Mm-hmm.
BC, Canada, which is where you live and I live
Mm-hmm.
close to. Um, what do you think the median household income in Vancouver was in 2021?
Canadian dollars?
Canadian dollars.
$60,000 a year.
82,000.
82.
That's the
Okay,
median. Yeah.
that's pretty good.
Yeah, like, and I was thinking about that because I was shocked when I saw that.
Hmm.
Full disclaimer, I've never made that or close.
Uh-huh.
And I know a lot of people who work in retail, work in kitchens,
Yeah.
work as some sort of charity monger or, low rung nonprofit worker.
Yeah. Totally.
So, I think like my impression of how
Mm-hmm.
wealthy Vancouver is extremely colored by my like social circumstances, the people right around me and how they're doing, right?
Totally.
And it turns out that like, Vancouver on average is doing better than I would have guessed for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's actually like a generally found um, or something that often shows up in polling is sort of the like a disconnect in between how people feel the economy is doing and how it's actually doing. Like I don't think this is like a new thing, particularly with Biden. I think that the famous one is how people always, if you ask people the two questions of how are you doing financially and how do you think people in general are doing financially, people usually think they themselves are doing all right, but that the economy is doing poorly. And there's like
That's
that
really
disconnect
interesting.
where I don't know if
Wow.
it's just like the negative bias of the news, right? That you hear about companies going bankrupt and layoffs and all that sort of thing, but you don't hear as much about this company successfully increased profits by 10% or whatever it might be, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There certainly is a negativity bias in the news, and yeah, I think it really can color how we make sense of things. And I mean, let's be honest, it's hard for any individual to like know like what the employment
Totally.
rate is and like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
people's lives are like much more kind of immediate than that, I think. And
Yeah, and
but
it doesn't really matter to any individual what the unemployment rate is, right? It
right, it
it
matters
matters
if
to them
you have
if
a
they have
job
a
or
job
not.
and like, their spouse has a job and their friends have jobs. That matters. But beyond that, it's like, oh wow, it's 3.5% down from 3.7. That
Right.
doesn't matter to anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess
Yeah.
where, you know, the rubber hits the road, or I don't know, maybe there's a better saying, but is that if it does affect who people vote for, right? If people are like,
Totally.
oh, yeah, the economy's in the toilet, we can't possibly keep Biden in,
Hmm.
um, and the economy is good, that there's like a
Yeah.
real messaging problem going on there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting for sure. And yeah, I do feel like an interesting part of it maybe is that like part of what makes the like current economy impressive was like the like how bad people thought it was going to be. Like when inflation was going way high, I think there was sort of an understanding that like people were saying that term soft landing a lot. Worried that a recession would be caused if the interest rates went up. Sort of, or there'd be no way to slow inflation without increasing unemployment. There's sort of, for a while there, I mean, and a lot of the world is still sort of struggling their way through this. Canada definitely as well. Sort of, how do you, stop inflation without causing a recession? So I feel like part of it is like that it's a very impressive performance given the circumstances. But
Hmm.
if you don't care about it that much and you aren't like, oh yes, supply chain backups caused this or that, then sort of all you know is that the prices in the grocery store are so much higher than they were before. And
Yeah,
you know
absolutely.
like you're
I
just
think
like,
that's
oh,
the
eggs are
thing.
expensive. The economy must be bad.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, honestly, yeah, grocery bills have been crazy lately. Like, true, really,
totally.
truly,
Yeah.
it's blows my mind. You know, I go in there and I get some greens for the rabbits, and I mean,
Hmm.
probably no one out there needs to hear me complain about grocery bills, but yeah, like my money doesn't do what it used to, and so yeah,
Yeah.
even if there are these like less tangible metrics that show that overall things are trending in a
Yeah.
good direction, that yeah, when I'm at the grocery store, it's hard for me to be like, well, you know, at least at least the
Yeah, well, and
unemployment
even
employment rate's down.
like wages have been growing faster than prices in the grocery store on average. There's been like, they call it the real wage growth, right? Where people are getting like raises that more than make up for inflation on average. But
Hmm.
even with that, it's like people don't look at like a carton of eggs and be like, "Ah, this equates to 15 minutes of me working at a job," right? And like
Right.
do that sort of math. Like, you're happy you get your raise, but you forget about it when you're like, "Oh my god, I just bought a gallon of milk. It costed that much." Like it's just
Totally.
just the sticker
And
shock of it.
it's also like a little bit depressing if you get a raise and you
Right?
can
Yeah.
just buy what you used to buy because everything costs more.
Yeah, I hadn't
Right?
thought of
Because
it
when
that
you
way.
get a
Yeah.
raise, yeah,
That
you're going
should
to
be
be
a
like, oh
moment
my
where you're
gosh,
like, I can buy more than before.
yeah, I could do something extra, right? So if people are
Right.
like, oh, yeah, I got a raise. Oh, look, I have the same amount left over. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
totally. Yeah, I got
that's
a
not
ten
going to
percent
feel good.
10% raise and all my bills went up 9%. Doesn't feel like
Yeah,
a huge
exactly.
win, even though math wise it's a 1% win.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I do
absolutely.
I feel too like there's this just like we like inflation is back down is generally what it's happening in Canada and in the States. Back to like within a percentage point of the 2% goal, or maybe 1.5%. But I feel like there's this like this thing that even in my head it's kind of hard to understand, that like a slowed growth rate, uh, like the prices aren't going to go back down. That would be called deflation. Like
Right.
getting it back down to 2% just means that its prices are going to continue climbing at a more reasonable rate, like like sort of what you standard expect. But it's very different from like the feeling of like just imagine the relief if you walked into a grocery store and everything was priced as it was, 3 years ago or whatever. That would feel great. And it's also never going to happen because deflation would be its own very bad problem. So everything's more expensive from now until forever. But the economy's doing great.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, inflation.
I think that really like kind of sums up the article in some ways, right? Where it's like, yeah, like things things don't feel better, but they are
Yeah.
anyways,
Yeah.
And I think about that too, like in terms of like, it kind of depends like what sort of time scale we're talking about, right? Because like there was a time when, a single income household could own a home. Not every single, but you know what I mean? Like
totally.
home ownership.
Union jobs.
As an example. Yeah, union jobs were much, there were more of them and they were easier to get. So are things better now than they were in 2020? Yes. But, if there's like this general trend where we're feeling like the younger generations are kind of feeling squeezed from all directions and like are like so far from like meeting the milestones of earlier generations, it is still hard to be like, well, this is good for post 2008, right? Like,
yeah, totally. Yeah, I feel like any campaign message that starts with, if you do the math, it's not a good campaign message.
Nobody does the math.
You don't know. Your feelings don't do the math,
They really don't. Well, speaking of feelings, is that a good segue?
Totally. We should move on to the article you wrote. The article I'm probably most excited to discuss of all the ones we have today.
That is
and
very
everyone,
sweet.
I don't think we're going to summarize it as much because I think everyone should just go to kier.substack.com and read it there. And put in your email address and follow the Instagram. Yeah, do all that. Kier here is back.
Liam.
You're very welcome.
Kier here is my newsletter, and I put out an essay every 2 weeks. This podcast comes out every other week. So yeah, if you go to kier.substack.com, you can sign up for the newsletter, get it straight to your email. Kier_here on Instagram, Twitter, and Threads. If you want to contact us, Liam and I, for this podcast, hottakethinktank@gmail.com is our email. And if you want to leave a public comment saying how much you love this or hate this, go to my newsletter and there's a comment section there. So we'll check out what you have to say. So last Friday I released an essay called Why We Need to Stop Romanticizing Illness. Don't become a Spoonie if you want to get better. So I talked about my time in the sort of online chronic illness community, and sort of how when I first joined and was, newly navigating illness, I found a lot of comfort and compassion and support there. But that over time, I kind of noticed this hostility towards people wanting to get better, basically. And kind of in those Spoonie spaces, chronic illness became an identity, right? And so if you wanted to change how you were feeling, people sort of found that threatening. And sometimes even ableist, that you would want to change. So that was the essay.
It was a fascinating essay, totally. And
what did you think, Liam?
I thought it was really interesting. It reminded me of the movie Sound of Metal.
Interesting.
Which is about a guy in a metal band who loses his hearing all of a sudden. Oh, wow. And his life is sort of goes far off track. But yeah, he ends up living in a house with other deaf folks who are very nice to him and also are not supportive of getting a cochlear implant or whatever it's called, which can
Yes.
bring some hearing back. Sort of, for like you went into in the article, the idea of that somehow being almost offensive to someone who's living with a disability or a condition. The idea that you'd want to get better from it can come off as an affront.
Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah, cochlear implants are very, very controversial within like certain deaf community groups. Absolutely, right? Because the idea is that, yeah, that deafness, that there's nothing wrong with being deaf, and why would you
Totally.
like want to, change yourself? And that's
Yeah.
like, I got a lot of really interesting like comments and messages after
Yeah.
writing this. And there was such a variety of sort of conditions that people told me that they over identified with to
Oh,
their
yeah?
detriment.
Hmm.
Yeah. Borderline personality disorder was
Mm-hmm.
mentioned.
Yep.
And this person sort of talked about the like manic pixie dream girl, like,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
interesting and quirky and like, and I kind of get that, right? Like that a lot of
Yeah.
people think that creativity is like tied to like high
Yeah.
drama or whatever, right? And that maybe
Totally.
you
Yeah, there's
lose your
something.
personality.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Something romantic about being unwell in certain
Unwell.
ways.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Depression was also mentioned.
Yep.
Post-traumatic stress disorder was mentioned.
Mm.
Autism was mentioned. So it sounds like
Wow.
the
Yeah.
norms
That's quite the list.
I it is quite the list, right? It sounds like this is sort of a trend that
Mm-hmm.
crosses various disability, mental health, neurodivergence focused online spaces that are kind of sound like have a little bit of a like crab in the bucket thing happening, or like misery likes company, right? That
Totally.
anyone who's trying to like improve their circumstances is potentially faces like rejection or shunning or disdain from a
Yeah.
group that's been really important to them for a long time.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. It brings to mind the idea of like a cognitive dissonance and dissonance reduction strategies,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like if you've made decisions in your life based on the idea that you have a certain, based on your chronic pain or whatever, right? You skip someone's birthday party or something like that. Um, then it does feel a bit like someone saying, "Oh, if you did this, maybe you could manage your pain better." I feel like you can see the line that would be drawn between like, should I have, was my excuse to not go to that birthday party invalid by what you're saying?
Yes.
Like, and so, how much are you attacking how I've lived my life for the last 5 years by saying that I could get better,
Totally. And I think it's worth saying that like a lot of people in Spoonie groups are young, and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
them probably, don't get taken seriously a lot, right? So people do doubt
Totally.
what they're
Yeah.
experiencing. Um, so it's sort of this tricky thing where it's like, yeah, it is really important for, people to be believed and understood and taken
Mm-hmm.
seriously. But it's like, I guess it really reminds me of being in the social justice subculture, and there's lots of
Hmm.
crossover
Mm-hmm.
because everything is personal, right? Like you
Right.
managing this condition that I have well
Mm.
hurts me, right?
Right.
Like,
Right. Yeah.
and that's insane. That's not how anything works, right? But that's like a really common thing that like, and I'd love to read this comment
Hmm.
in
Yeah.
it's long, but it's worth it because
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it
Go for it.
highlights this really well.
Hmm.
So this is from someone named Emily, and her Instagram is Emily Talokita, and I will put a link in the show notes. So this is what she had to say. I grew up knowing no one with a disability like mine in my friend circle, and I was very lonely as a kid. When I found the Spoonie community and the body positivity community online as a lonely teenager, it was a dream come true for me, I thought. Finally, people who would understand me and know what I've been through. It really kept me stuck in a victim mentality for a long time and feeling like I had no agency to improve my health. I have been doing a lot of things wrong, and there was a ton of improvement to be made, and I was able to do a lot of it after years of hard work. I still have rheumatoid arthritis, and the joint damage is real. I have chronic pain, and I am disabled. Ever since I began posting about my health changes, I have had people who were friends for over a decade literally stop talking to me, so many of them. It's soul crushing, and multiple others have called me out or accused me of being fat phobic or ableist. My fiance was 400 pounds and got diagnosed with congestive heart failure at 25. He and I have been losing weight together in a sustainable way for both of our health conditions over the last year and sharing our progress. He was never involved in the Spoonie community or body positivity, and he has received nothing but support and kindness from everyone. It's funny, the dichotomy, very eye-opening. I got to a point where I was on over 15 medications by 25, suicidal, in an abusive relationship, my disease flaring at its worst, my diet was trash, I was 100 pounds overweight, and binge drinking and smoking. But everyone always told me how great I was and how hot I was, and they loved me like that. Now that I'm happy and healthy and actually feeling good, they hate me. They don't want to hear anything about the good times, but they were so down to watch me when I was a train wreck. End quote.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I'm so glad to hear she's doing better now, but I can't imagine. Yeah, like losing friends over taking better care of yourself. That's quite something.
It's so brutal. It's so brutal, right? And I kind of learned about the online fat acceptance groups and what they can be like through Molly Francis, who's a writer whose Substack is great, and then also Megan Ann, who's a YouTuber. And I just feel like there are a lot of parallels where people tend to feel a great deal of relief and support when they first get involved. But if you stick
Right.
around long enough, you notice that people get shunned and mistreated for deciding to lose weight, even if
Right.
it's to improve their health, and even if they're not judging anyone else's decision or even
Yeah.
commenting on anyone,
Right,
like
right.
they're
It's sort
making
of,
a
it's
personal decision.
yeah, but it's taken as implied that like you would only lose weight if you thought that it was bad to be heavy. So
Yes,
you're calling us
exactly.
bad by losing weight.
Yeah. It's fat
Yeah.
phobic to lose weight, period. Right.
Right.
And again, it's because fatness has become an identity, and, you know, any
Yeah.
change threatens that. And it's really sad because it's like, you know, you can tease things out where it's like, you know, fat people should absolutely not be discriminated against. You know, our built
Yeah.
environment should be as accessible as possible to enable as many people as possible to be mobile and be out in the world. You know, there's like
Totally.
certainly great work to be done with like medical professionals and educating them to be just as thorough in exploring the health of a fat person. But that being said, like I guess for Molly Francis, for Megan Ann, and for myself, like there's sort of a line that's drawn when people start saying that obesity is not connected to ill health, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's when you're getting into misinformation and, you
Yeah.
know, hearing that.
Yeah. It's almost more of like an ideology at that point than, like, or a dogma almost to like conform to, as opposed to like, yeah, I don't know. It does feel like it's almost beyond the goal of like looking for like an accurate representation of the world, and putting like more
Yes.
value on how the words are making people feel than on whether or not something's true.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it can have consequences. Like, you know,
Yeah.
I've heard people talk about how, like, being in those groups increase their fear of doctors. And,
Right, right, because people share stories about bad things that happened at doctors.
exactly.
I assume, right? And it's
Yeah.
bad that those things are happening, and it's not ideal if the stories scare other people away.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like if it's making people less likely to seek medical help, and I think that that's could be possibly happening in the Spoonie community as well, where it's like, yeah, if
Yeah,
you've decided that like doctors, because you have these really hard to treat conditions that are not well understood, that means that, doctors like don't care to help you get better,
right. Yeah,
maybe even that they don't want you to get, like they're not going to help
yeah.
you, right? Like that's when, again, like I don't know, you're starting to risk people going to professionals for the help that they need, and
Totally. Well,
that seems
and
like a bad idea.
and I just start worrying about this would happen more in some communities than others, but like self-diagnosis, right? Like
Yes.
if something's gone very wrong, and something's gone wrong, and you think you figure out what it is, and then you find a community of people who say yes, that's what it is, and don't ever talk to a doctor about it. Uh, I'd be very worried about that person.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the thing is like there a sudden weight gain or weight loss can totally indicate a
Yeah,
dramatic change, a medical problem that has
totally. Yeah,
arisen, and
yeah, like a
so
tumor or
that
something.
absolutely thyroid problems, like there's
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of cancer, right? Like there's really,
Yeah.
significant illnesses that are tied to like sudden weight gain or loss, and that's
Mm.
why ideally people have family doctors that they see regularly enough that like patterns or like large
Yeah.
changes can be noticed, so
Mm.
anyways, I found that comment like Emily's comment pretty devastating, but it sounds like
Yeah.
despite all those, forces around her, that she's like choosing health anyway. So there you
Totally.
go. It's
Yeah.
possible.
Keep up the good fight, Emily.
Yeah, exactly.
It seems interesting how much sort of identity does seem like woven through all the people who left comments. It was sort of about various identities that they held, or communities of people who all sort of share that identity with them. And it did make me think, like, would it be better to like join the community? Like, I don't know, now if you're in like the bike rider community, or like the bunny owning community, something like that. But I feel like the funny thing is, I feel like both those communities also might push back a bit if you moved from bunnies to guinea pigs or something like that. You know what I mean? It's like this self-selecting effect of like someone, if you care enough about something to like, frequent the forum about it, then it like becomes a part of how you identify, and then, it has to be
Yeah.
protected.
That's a really interesting point. There was actually a comment under the essay that said something about how like identity is getting harder and harder to tell apart from a fandom. And I
Yeah,
thought that was very interesting, right? Because
totally.
on the one hand, you have sort of all the like social justice related identities, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
queer or Spoonie or whatever. But you also have people that like really strongly identify as a Hufflepuff, or I don't know,
Totally.
like
Yeah.
as an e-girl, or like,
Yep. Yep. Or
like
like a
it.
horror movie fan, like people who know
Yeah,
every horror movie.
exactly. Like
Yeah.
there's something like, I don't know if it's like, um, that the internet, like the way that it was designed, sort of uh,
Mm-hmm.
creates the context for this sort of clannishness, or maybe we just are clannish whether we're online or
Right,
not, or
right. Or the internet
yeah,
supercharges it or something. Yeah,
yeah,
interesting. I feel I loved your essay last week, and I also do feel like it's like in some ways the tip of a very interesting iceberg. Like that, just hearing that wide list of like people who were related to it from all those different communities. It's like you're tapping into something really interesting here for sure. I can't wait to read what you write next week.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to writing more, and there were just so many super thoughtful comments and emails that came
Sweet.
through. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear it. Well, should we wrap up with the quiz?
Yes. So for our listeners, regularly,
this is the first quiz.
this is the first quiz of many. Liam will be quizzing me probably every episode.
Yeah, that's the plan. I think I'm sort of the more like data-driven one of the two of us. Like I love
fair.
I love a good statistic, and I don't know. I love just we have like the open-ended conversation, just throwing ideas out there, and then I love to like occasionally come back down to earth and like look up a number and see if like my intuition for it is roughly in the right ballpark.
Well, and I love this idea too, because like having kind of come out of social justice orthodoxy, like it's interesting to try and like reorient yourself to like as close as possible to understanding how things really are,
Totally.
So,
putting the solid numbers not above necessarily like an ideology, but but
it's interesting.
Aspiring,
it's like, am I more pessimistic than what's really happening? Am I more optimistic than what's really happening?
Totally.
Like it's
just trying to. I like to just kind of stay calibrated. I feel like sometimes in my life I've gotten like all caught up in a narrative, and then I like find out that it's not actually happening at all.
Wow, that's easy to happen on social media. All right, what do you got for me?
Okay, so it goes back to your bit of good news about unions, and I noticed you throwing some numbers around during that segment. So I'm curious if you might nail this one. But it's from Gallup, the pollster. They've been polling for the public opinion in America on labor unions since 1936. With the question, do you approve or disapprove of labor unions? So the quiz for you is for the year 2022. What percentage of respondents said they approved of labor unions?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I mean, let's see. I knew that Gen Z is the most pro-union generation, and they support at 64%, although I don't know that number is taken from that Gallup poll.
Right, and that might have been a different... Like, I don't know if that was just asking, do you approve or disapprove of labor unions? Or if it was like would you join one? That sort of
totally
wording can definitely move around numbers in a poll.
I'm going to go with 60%.
The answer is 71. 71%.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And I did pull a couple more numbers for context, just for fun. The lowest it's ever been was 48, which was in 2009. And it's been a pretty steady climb since then. For the last 13 years or so.
That's really interesting that it was so low right after the Great Recession.
Yeah, totally. I feel like that was a time of a very bad economy. But interestingly, it wasn't a comparative dip during COVID, which was, the even more recent terrible time in the economy. People liked the unions more by the end of the pandemic than they did at the beginning.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Two other stats. The highest it's ever been was 75% in 1953.
Wow.
So this year's only 4% off of the all-time high.
I mean, I hope we can get there next year, maybe.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it might be. We might be on our way to the broadest approval of labor unions that America's ever seen.
I sure hope so. How cool to end on such a good note.
Totally, yeah. Start with good news, end with good news. Who knows what happened in the middle?
Exactly. Well, this has been Hot Take Think Tank. Until next time.